Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video I'll be reviewing the latest season of American Ninja Warrior ANW 12, and what a strange season. Obviously there were a lot of changes here due to COVID that caused some really massive format changes, almost all of which for the worst in my opinion, especially in comparison to ANW 11, which for me was one of the better seasons of the show, due to its changed editing approach and also some really fun format changes. But ANW 12 pretty much undoes all of that. I mean, to me, this season really just felt like filler. It just felt like they made something to air on TV, because as a season of ANW, it just feels completely pointless. I mean, the main event of the season is the Vegas Finals, the actual 4-stage course, but here we didn't get that, and to me, it just felt like more of a spin-off than an official season. I mean, the entirety of the season takes place in a stadium in St. Louis, and because of those limitations on space and probably crew, we got a lot of the same obstacles in multiple episodes, which did make the course feel pretty stale to me as well. I also just couldn't take this season seriously when in comparison to other seasons. Now, that's not to say that there aren't good moments within the season, but for me, it's very tough to look at the season as something even in comparison to some of the previous seasons of the show. But like most of my other season reviews, we'll be running through this season episode by episode, so let's get started with episode 1. And the premiere, I did find to be a pretty weak episode in my opinion, and one of the major reasons for that was because the editing was just extremely choppy. Now, I know they had to cover up the involvement of Drew Drechsel due to obviously stuff that happened outside of the show, which is, I mean, I do think it's the correct PR move for NBC to do here. But that doesn't change the fact that he was actually there and they have to go out of their way to edit him out of the show. I mean, they had a lot of content here that they couldn't show, like a package on Drew's team. They couldn't show the Power Tower, as we know now that Drew made it there and lost. So these exclusions from the episode were really felt, in my opinion, especially because of the extra time was filled by the show returning to its old ways. I mean, we got a bevy of really dramatic intro packages that I don't care about, which the reducing of these was one of the greatest pros of season 11 in my eyes, and why I do hold it in such high regard. But I really hate how heavy-handed the editing is here, where like they start the episode by saying, we're doing this to bring hope to the people at home. It's like, no, you're doing this to fill up your schedule to make advertisement money, but whatever. We do see the course, which is fine. We start the shrinking steps, and we end with the warp wall in every single qualifying round. Wait for it was the second obstacle, which I found pretty slow and boring. The third obstacle was Ring Chaser, which is something they really advertised pre-season. And I do like this obstacle. I think it's pretty fun, where you have to catch the ring before it rolls into the water, and if you don't catch the ring, then the obstacle's a lot harder. So I thought that was a nice twist to add in there. Rib Run was fine. Slingshot was fine. The Mega Wall was still there, but they did return to the ANW 10 rules, where you only have one attempt on it, and if you do fail it, you can go for the regular wall, which I don't actually hate for this season, because this season with such a smaller pool of competitors and with smaller qualifying rounds, we only have 12 people moving on from each round, and they got rid of the rules that allowed every clear to move on, probably in fear that the course was too easy at points. And with the Power Tower being involved, though, I mean, not really in this episode, all this made speed even more important in this season, which ends up making the decision on whether or not to go for the Mega Wall even more important, as we'll talk about next episode. Another thing I need to talk about is the teams, which was kind of a pointless part of the show. I mean, I don't mind it as a concept for the season, as I think it's a pretty cool way of casting a smaller season like this, to where supposedly these ninjas got to pick 2 others to bring along with them to the season. But I mean, obviously that's not what happened. Obviously casting still decided who was on each team, but still, it's an interesting concept. But the teams themselves were really pointless, and for me, it really dumbed down the importance of the Power Tower, where I didn't like how it functioned this season. I liked how it functioned last season, where through winning the Power Tower, you got these advantages in future rounds. Here, the only reward is like bringing your whole team with you to the next round, which is, again, pointless. It's like, if they weren't good enough to make it to the next round, here, it's like they're obviously more than likely not going to make it through in the future. It's like, I don't see the point of this being a thing. I never really felt any real stakes during these segments. Now for the actual highlights of the episode, I was pretty surprised to see Cameron Wembley back, who had competed in the past in ANW 4 and did pretty well, actually. He cleared both qualifying and semifinals, though he was too slow to move on to Vegas, but it was really cool to see him back here, though obviously he didn't do that well. Jody Avila's wife got a really long segment about her being a nurse, and this again was really heavy-handed to me, especially because she ends up failing the second obstacle anyway. The slingshot seemed to be the real ninja killer here, with some decently big names failing there, like Sandy Zimmerman, Casey Suhalki, Jonathan Horton, and Flip Rodriguez being the most surprising of the bunch. We get some fun clears too, though, with Nate Hansen being like 5'2" and clearing pretty quickly, I might add. Alyssa Beard had a strong run. Mike Wright, the Speedo guy, finally cleared course. So that's something. Grant McCartney got a lot of screen time this episode, but I do feel like this was further perpetuated by, again, the Drew situation, having to need to fill up more time on the show, but he does end up clearing as well. And in the end of the episode, we have Jody Avila, who seemed like a really random choice, being saved for last, and he gets the fastest time. And, I mean, of course he does. Though, I mean, technically Drew got the fastest time, supposedly, but who cares? Obviously, they don't air the Power Tower due to Drew's involvement here, but I do find it weird how we end the episode here, and there's like no mention of this in future episodes of like why there wasn't a Power Tower here. And like they try to add like, oh, for this round, we're adding in a Power Tower for some reason. Like, it was just really dumb. Now for episode 2, where we got a couple new obstacles here in the Lunatic Ledges and the Ferris wheel, both of which are fine. They're both pretty mid-tier obstacles in my eyes, though I do enjoy Lunatic Ledges more than Wait For It. And the Ferris wheel, I mean, I could do without the Ferris wheel. I think at this point, it's pretty slow. I think it was pretty cool the first time we saw it, but now it's like, yeah, we kind of get the point. Yeah, you get the choice of going up and down. Yeah, we're good. The results themselves were fine, and really, that's how I feel about the episode as a whole. It was fine. I mean, there's not much to actively complain about, but there's not much overly good either. We did get some ridiculous team segments, like Rue Yori's team being a like cat versus dog people thing. We got Jake Murray's team where we saw them have a barbecue, and that was kind of dumb. I don't feel like many of the runs really stand out here. I was surprised to see JJ Woods fail the ring chaser, and this was one of the few times that missing the ring actually played a factor. Caleb Bergstrom failed on the ring chaser as well, and that was a really big surprise. Not because like I think Caleb Bergstrom's like one of the best competitors in A&W, but he did have a pretty fast run up until that point and like failed the monkey bar section of the ring chaser, which we didn't really see anyone else fail. But really, this episode was filled with clears. And again, speaking of Caleb Bergstrom, the first person we see clear the course was his girlfriend in Ashley McConville. And I did find it humorous how they first mentioned this fact immediately after saying that she loves her uncle more than any other person in the world, which is like, isn't that kind of a dig on Caleb? But whatever, she did clear, though she did take 3 tries to get up the wall. We do get a decent amount of memorable names clearing as well, like Abel Gonzalez, Jamie Ron, Rue Yori, Krista Ganji, Jesse LeBrecq had a really strong run. Nick Hansen clears the mega wall for the first time this season, but something interesting here was the fact that he was actually the slowest clear of the night, and in doing so, he actually didn't qualify for the next round. So despite his clear being probably the most celebrated of the episode and one that they continue to mention in future episodes, he didn't even make it to the next round, which I found pretty funny. Daniel Gill was saved for last, and he could have made it to the Power Tower, but ends up missing on the mega wall, but moves on anyway. As for the top times, we do have Ethan Swanson end up getting the second fastest time, while Jake Murray just blows the course away, clearing in only 54 seconds, which I believe is the fastest qualifying time in a while. Like, I really can't think of the last time someone cleared it that quickly, but we get to the Power Tower, which ends in a pretty tame affair. I mean, Jake Murray does win pretty easily there, though we never do see Ethan Swanson again for the rest of the season, which is kind of weird. What ends up happening, supposedly, is that Ethan Swanson came into contact with someone that did have COVID in the middle of production, and because that was eventually sent home because they couldn't test him in time for the filming of the episode. So that kind of sucks for him. With the current circumstances that we're living in, it was probably still the right call to make. Now for episode 3, which for me I felt like was the best episode so far, probably even the best of the season. We do see the course, and again, we have the Lunatic Ledges and Ferris wheel still there, but instead they replaced the ring chaser, which I was actually personally surprised by. I thought they really loved that obstacle. I didn't think they were going to switch it out, but instead we got the Beehive, which was okay. I mean, it seemed like a decent modification on the wing nuts, but I actually liked the ring chaser better. And then we also got the spinning bridge instead of the rib run, which was fine. But I felt like this episode had a good chunk of memorable moments and runs from it, where something I did find strange about this episode was that we got a good chunk of Lunatic Ledges fails. And it can be a tricky obstacle, but I never felt like this was an obstacle that did much damage. So I really don't know why it did so much damage here. It felt like a lot of people were like really stalling while jumping to the final platform, and through that lost momentum and eventually failed that jump there. But by a whole bunch of fails there, no one really too memorable fails there outside of Michelle Warnke, who probably had one of the more surprising fails of the entire night. On the spin bridge, we did have a couple other beginner names fail there, like Shanique Lavette and Brandon Mears, which, again, I just find funny how Brandon Mears keeps on failing at balance obstacles over and over and over again. But we did see the Ferris wheel also do a decent amount of damage here as well, with people like Dougie Fresh failing there, Shaw Darlingham. Adam Rail had a really shocking fail at the Ferris wheel, as, again, he's someone that's renowned for his grip strength, but he somehow failed there. Also, Lauren Ball failed there, which, I mean, that's not as surprising, as upper body's always been his weakness. But we did also get a blast from the past, as the show would put it, and by that they mean Ben Mielek, who, I mean, is fine. Like, I have nothing against Ben Mielek, but like when I heard like, oh, we're getting a blast from the past, I was expecting it to be like, I don't know, Brian Orozco, Paul Casimir, I don't know, Levi Muelberg, someone like that. But it's like, no, it's Ben Mielek, this guy who hasn't competed in 2 seasons. Oh, there he fails the Ferris wheel as well. On for the clears. I mean, we did see the return of Thomas Stillings, who didn't get the call for last season for some reason, but was the first clear here. And I did find it kind of troubling that the way the show portrays him here is kind of making it feel like the only reason he got the call back is because something terrible happened in his life, where he obviously gets the segment about his wife having a brain tumor. And it's like, is that the reason he got the call? Like, I mean, again, like, it's really disturbing to me how A&W makes his decisions with bringing competitors back, where it's like, once their usefulness in terms of telling a depressing story is done with, then they're no use to the show anymore, and they're not worth being on TV. And while, like, Thomas Stillings isn't necessarily, like, the biggest, like, top-tier competitor in A&W, I do feel like he is someone that definitely should be getting called back, especially because he pretty consistently performs pretty well. Najee had a bit of a sloppy run this episode, where he almost fails the spin bridge and fails the mega wall, but he still ends up clearing and moving on. H. Harrington showed a lot of promise with his run. I thought his run was pretty good. Jesse Graff cleared as you would expect, but my favorite run of the night was easily David Campbell's. And I did love how they showed clips of him on every season, and we get this segment of him delivering pizzas, but his run was just really fun, where he blows through the first obstacle, and most of the Lunatic Ledge is just to get stuck on that final dismount that we see so many people fail earlier. But then all of a sudden, like, he just jumps for it, and essentially just like spider flip to the platform, and that was really fun to watch. And then he gets his revenge on the spin bridge, which he failed in A&W 4. Mind you, I mean, I believe he's passed it since then. But still, that's a fail that I always remember, because obviously at that point he was like the biggest name in A&W. And it was so shocking that he failed that obstacle. So here, got through that, and even got the mega wall, where like the mega wall, he like barely gets it. It literally takes like all of his grip strength to hang on to that, but he does get it. I thought it was a really riveting run. Probably my favorite run of the entire season. 2 fastest times of the night came from Sean Bryan, and for me, surprisingly, RJ Roman, who, well, by the time he was the final run of the night, I mean, it kind of became clear that he was going to get one of the faster times, but I was not expecting him to get to the Power Tower from the beginning of the episode, and the Power Tower in this episode was a particularly great one. I mean, some of the more recent Power Towers have been blowouts, but it was this Power Tower that really reminded me why I liked the concept to begin with. I mean, this one was back and forth the entire way through, all the way to the end, where Sean Bryan is the first one to land on the final platform, but RJ dives for it immediately after he lands and is able to hit the button right before Sean is able to. So again, I thought this was a really fun Power Tower. And really, the episode as a whole was a really strong one for me. Now we're episode 4, the final qualifying episode. And for me, I found this episode to be, again, pretty unremarkable. I mean, we did get the return of Off the Hook and a new 5th obstacle in Sideways, which to me felt very easy and uninspired. And just like a lot of this episode, also just really forgettable. We did get a clear as the second run of the night, which was pretty surprising, where Vance Harris, who the show kept on talking about as this guy doesn't even train for American Ninja Warrior. It's like, so you're admitting that this course is too easy. And this episode, we did get a large amount of clears to back that up, where Vance here didn't even qualify for the next round, as he did have one of the lower times out of the men. So he was another example of time, again, really playing a factor here on this season. I did find it weird how Lance Peakus' teammate, Kat Henshin, gets this segment about how both of their spouses have MS and how that really bonds them, and she feels like really early, so again, that was a lot of wasted time. But she also pretty much says during the segment that she hopes that she can be friends with Lance after the season. So I found it kind of funny that even the show isn't even hiding the fact that these teams weren't handpicked by the players. This episode did also have a good chunk of sob stories, which again is probably another one of the main reasons why I did find it mostly pretty dull. We did see Tiana Weberly clear for first time, so that was nice. David Wright's team got this really weird segment about baking cakes, and I do think Amir Malik had a really fun run where he breaks the buzzer at the end of the course. We got some other notable clears that were fast forwarded, like Brian Kretsch, Lance Pekus, Kevin Bull. But I was very surprised by the fail of Karsten Williams, who was really poised to get one of the fastest times of the night. He was doing really well, but then out of nowhere, he just fails sideways. And again, sideways for me is just a really easy obstacle. I mean, in terms of American Ninja Warrior standards, obviously. So to see Karsten Williams fail there was a surprise. Megan Martin also fails sideways, but still qualifies. And yeah, Megan Martin, I think at this point for me, she kind of feels out of it. I don't feel like Megan Martin's really performed well recently, and I think this season really showed that. I was surprised that Kid Awadi got skipped, as production seems to love him, but again, they didn't really focus on him much this season, which was a pretty big surprise. I did like Michael Torres' team, which included Kyle Schulze and Jimmy Choi, who have disabilities, and while they didn't move on, Torres did get to the Power Tower, and Torres had to compete against Joe Moravsky, who also got the Mega Wall along with the second fastest time, which, again, pretty impressive run there. But something I did find really underwhelming was the fact that Joe Moravsky won the Power Tower. As, again, the episode really makes you root for Michael Torres' team. Again, he has two people with disabilities on his team. He has Jimmy Choi and Kyle Schulze, who, even before this season, have been shown as pretty sympathetic figures, people who are pretty inspirational to people with disabilities. But then we just get Joe Moravsky beating Torres. Mind you, it was very close. It was a very close race, but Joe Moravsky just beats him. And Joe's team really just didn't get much focus. I mean, he did have Will Schlageter, who did get a package and everything, was kind of a notable figure from the episode, but it's the other member from Joe Moravsky's team was completely invisible. So it's really weird to me that Joe ends up winning this, because I feel like the editing was favoring the other outcome, but what are you going to do? Now for episode 5, where we do get the start of the semifinals, and we got a good chunk of new obstacles. I really liked Clockwork. Despite it being relatively easy, I thought it was an interesting twist to where all these clocks move simultaneously, and you need to build up momentum to move the other bars closer to you. I thought that was an interesting twist there. I liked Burn Rubber, which was a pretty fun modification of Tire Run. They did make Sideways a bit harder, but still, no one failed it. Then we got another one of the more advertised obstacles, and that is Corkscrew, which I really loved watching. I mean, while this season definitely lacked overall in the obstacle department, I really do like some of the new ideas that this season introduced with, again, Ring Chaser, Corkscrew. I thought these were pretty fun obstacles, and the obstacle immediately after this was the dungeon. I thought that was a pretty fun obstacle as well. Though I did feel like it felt like an easier obstacle than what we normally expect nowadays from the typical penultimate obstacle of city final courses. But I did like this course despite the results being pretty heavily weighted towards the back half of the course. And we did start off the episode with a shocker in Kid Awadi being shown first. And again, I can't believe that they really just brushed him over on this season. It's he really wasn't advertised at all. And he is shown as the first fail on the Corkscrew, and he doesn't end up moving forward. So this was a pretty underwhelming season for him. Sandy Zimmerman also fails this Corkscrew, but she does end up moving on as she is the second place woman. Donovan Metoyer finally gets airtime on the show. I was really happy for him here because he is a massive fan of the show. He's someone that I know is a big Sasuke fan as well, and to see him just get skipped over every time he competed before this was pretty disappointing, but here finally did well. He was able to get to the dungeon and was able to move on. Tyler Gillette finally gets some airtime too, where he gets normally skipped over for no real reason, but he was the first clear of the night. Grant McCartney gets this really dramatic run with him struggling on every single obstacle, but he ends up failing at the end of the Corkscrew and doesn't end up moving forward. We do get the fast forward of some bigger names that don't move on, like Abel Gonzalez and Kevin Bull. Flip does get skipped as well, but he does end up moving on. Adam Rail clears the course and gets skipped. We do also get a long string of runs that start midway through, and that starts off with Jamie Ron, who gets a lot of content about his thumb, but he does end up slipping at the end of the dungeon. Daniel Gill gets the fastest time of the night so far, but again, we only see about half of his run. Same goes for Jake Murray, where we start his run on Sideways, and they talk about how, he blew through the first half of the course. It's well, then why didn't we see that? I mean, it's less than a minute. You couldn't take out any of these dumber segments of the show that just show us the first minute of his run, but whatever. He does end up struggling on Spire Trap, but he still clears a second faster than Gill. Probably the biggest shock of the night was Alyssa Beard failing on Clockwork, as only 2 people failed it the entire night. And like for someone of her caliber, fail obstacle that early, I think that was surprising. Jessie LeBrecht does well as always, and I did find it strange how like before her run, we do see some fast forwarded runs. But then we get to Jesse's package, and in the middle of Jesse's package, we see Krista Ganji's run. It's like, what? Like, it's so funny to me that they just look at him as, like, Jesse's fiance and, like, nothing more than that. Like, they don't care enough to show him in any other capacity. But she does end up getting to the dungeon, which is the strongest run for a woman in these semifinal rounds. But then, again, out of nowhere, they save Jody Avila for last again, who, again, I like Jody Avila. He seems to have gotten a lot better in the time since the last few seasons, but again, it's weird that they saved him for last. I also do think part of this has to do with the fact that they just love the story of his wife being a nurse during COVID. I think that's something they really wanted to prop up as well, but I was surprised that they didn't give the spot to Jake Murray or Daniel Gill, who, I mean, Daniel Gill, obviously a much bigger name. Jake Murray had the fastest run of the night, but instead, Jody Avila fails the dungeon, which was really shocking to me because, again, he was saved for last. Now for episode 6, the second semifinal episode, and we saw a pretty similar course. The second obstacle was changed to spring forward, and the 5th obstacle was changed to slingshot. Again, these are fine obstacles, but I didn't like how they made the first half of the course a lot slower than the previous episode, and I also felt like these were both harder obstacles than the previous ones. And we see that in the results, where less people make it through Corkscrew, despite the field competitors here being really competitive. And with this episode, I felt like the editing was, again, really rocky. I mean, we do know now that, again, this was the episode that Drew competed in, and that could have played a factor, but we also just got so many fast forwards from so many elite competitors. People like Lauren Ball, Brian Kretsch, David Campbell, they all got one segment together, which, again, not super surprising that they got skipped over, but obviously disappointing. I was shocked when they fast forwarded David Wright, who made a really deep run and ended up failing at the very end of the dungeon. And I feel like that would have made for a more riveting run than some of the other runs that we were shown. Jerry D'Aurelio was one of the 2 women to move on, yet she was, again, skipped over. We fast forwarded some of the fastest clears of the night, with RJ Roman, Austin Gray, and Lucas Reale all getting fast forwarded while getting mention of having the fastest time of the night up to that point. But something that really made this episode for me was some of the shocking fails that we had within it. Megan Martin and Maddie Howard both failed Burn Rubber, which was really surprising, especially Maddie Howard, considering how much the show was promoting her throughout the season. I was pretty convinced that Amir Malik was going to be the first clear of the night, but then we see him fail at the very top of the spider trap, which was really surprising. Probably the most shocking fail of the night, probably of the entire season, is Sean Bryan. Like, the fact that he fails on Slingshot, which was also, mind you, fast forwarded, was a really big shock to me. I mean, he was one of the top contenders for me coming into the season. See him eliminated in a flash was just really shocking. Lance Pekus ends up falling on Burn Rubber as well, again, completely unexpected. Tage Harrington, again, massive shocker. Looked like one of the strongest rookies of the season. He ends up failing on Slingshot. Another surprise, though, kind of in the opposite way, was Dan Polizzi getting his full run shown. Which, again, mind-blowing, as that never happens for Dan Polizzi. But he does make it to the dungeon, which was a pretty solid run. We do see someone on the bubble of being eliminated, and that's Dougie Fresh here, where he doesn't end up moving forward, but he's shown as like the last person cut before that. They also spent a lot of time on Will Schlager, and I mentioned him before with the Joe Moravsky thing, but for me, I don't really see much potential in Will. I mean, like, he has a nice story of being a super fan and watching his dad compete in AEW 4 when he was a kid, but I don't really see him as a future top contender based on how he performed this season. Again, obviously, he could improve a lot and do better, but it's like, for me, I just felt like we were just wasting a lot of time by focusing so much on him, especially because he also got a lot of focus his first run as well. Jessie Graff ran this episode as well, and she seemed to really struggle a lot. I mean, she did make it to Corkscrew, but I do wonder why the women seem to be having a really tough time with this course. Again, it was this one specific episode because it felt like last episode, like, again, we had Sandy Zimmerman and Jessie LeBrecht both make pretty deep runs. Here, it was only Jessie Graff, and even then, she barely even got as far as she did. We did see Najee become the first clear of the night, and he had this nice segment about Ninja for Black Lives, talking about his experiences while growing up, and his run was really solid, though I do question them allowing him to use his inhaler right before the spider trap, which, again, I understand he has asthma, but that seems like an unfair advantage, but whatever, who cares about the integrity of this show anyway. Michael Torres got a really strong run as well, and Again, for me, this entire season, he had been set up as a pretty top contender as well. But then we obviously have Joe Moravsky, who was saved for last, and he does end up getting the fastest time of the night, just barely. But again, this episode as a whole was kind of a mess in terms of its presentation, but there were some nice surprises here and there that still kept it interesting for me. Now for episode 7, part 1 of the finals, which obviously format-wise, I did find this really underwhelming, where we essentially got a modified city finals course, and the top 8 from that course move on to the Power Tower. And I really found the finals here just kind of boring, at least in this first episode, as we were pretty much just seeing obviously the same thing over and over again, as we do with most other episodes. But considering this is like the exact same people we just saw from like a couple episodes ago, and considering the format of the course hasn't really changed that much, it did feel really repetitive to me. And also without the drama that we eventually get next episode of these top tier competitors getting eliminated one by one, it really made a lot of these runs just kind of feel bland to me. Now, they did actually modify the course a decent amount from semifinals, but I'll be honest, I kind of like the semifinals course more. I mean, we did get the falling shells, which I thought was a pretty good obstacle. I mean, it's not like this radically different obstacle that we've never seen before. I mean, it's kind of like a modification of the snapback, but having the shelves fall. But yeah, I really liked the obstacle. I thought it was a lot of fun. It took out a lot of competitors, so I thought that was pretty good. Diamond Dash was a balanced obstacle here, and I never really loved this obstacle. In my opinion, I just feel like the Spin Bridge is a better version of it. Spin Hopper was the 5th obstacle, and it's another one that I never personally loved. I find it a pretty slow obstacle, and even when it's not slow, it's like another one that I just don't find super interesting. Slam Dunk was the obstacle after Salmon Ladder, which was a massive downgrade from the Corkscrew, both in terms of entertainment and in terms of difficulty, though we did obviously see some people fail it. And then we got Dragon Back, which was actually a really fun 9th obstacle. It's like kind of a mix of the Stair Hopper, Slingshot, and Double Dipper, and it was a pretty fun obstacle to watch. But when it comes to the actual episode itself, I found this episode pretty slow, though there were some pretty big surprises. Due to the format of the finals and having it split over 2 2-hour episodes, we were shown 16 runs in full in this episode, and even next episode we do see every run but one that was fast forwarded that we will talk about, and obviously Drew, but I mean, it's Drew. But in this episode in particular, again, with no fast forwards, we're seeing literally every run they could show us. I did feel like that harmed the pacing for me personally. I mean, we do get some falling shell fails. It seems like a lot of people really struggle with Diamond Dash as well, where we have Dan Polizzi fail there, and probably more surprisingly, as I mentioned before, one of the biggest surprises of the season here in Michael Torres, who I really thought was getting the winners at it. But again, he fails the Diamond Dash. But again, in a similar vein here, I can't believe Jody Avila failed the Slam Dunk. Again, like, Jody Avila is another one that, like, why did he get the edit that he got? I really don't understand it. I mean, he was the last shown in both his previous appearances, with his semifinals run not even being the fastest time of the night or anything. He fails the dungeon. So I find it really strange how they put so much focus into Jody Avila and Michael Torres over people like Austin Gray and Adam Rail, who did make much deeper runs into the season. And yeah, it really makes me question like the editing approach to this season, though we'll talk about that a bit later as well. Another surprise was Tyler Gillette failing Spring Forward, which really came out of nowhere. We did get some bigger names failing Dragon Back, like Flip Rodriguez and Jamie Ron, both of which who didn't move on. Cam Baumgartner fails at the very, very end of the obstacle, where the bar derails on the Double Dipper section of the obstacle, and he doesn't end up letting go of the bar, which causes a DQ. So that was a massive surprise as well, and he doesn't end up moving forward either, so that's kind of a really disappointing end to his season. We did get 4 clears in this episode, and I felt like a lot of them were really hard to watch. I mean, Lucas Reale and Austin Gray's runs were really just unremarkable and really boring. Najee had a really strong run, and the edit really made me lean towards him as the winner coming into finale night, but obviously I was wrong. And the final run of the night was a pleasant surprise of Jessie Lebrecq clearing the finals course. That, to be honest, I really thought the women were going to have no shot here of making it to the Power Tower. And while her time was slow, I mean, only 7 people ended up clearing, so she made it through. So good on her for that. But now moving on to the finale, which was fine. I did find it funny how the first run they showed was Joshua Lewis, who we haven't seen a single run from him the entire season. And we literally get our introduction to him during the finale here. But he ends up failing Slam Dunk, and I did like the foreshadowing we got here, where we do see Joe Moravsky talking about how he's worried that something like that could happen to him, and spoiler alert,
it does. Which, I mean, I guess we might as well talk about now. I mean, that was probably the most shocking fail of the night for me. I mean, I could see Joe failing Dragon Back, but failing on Slam Dunk was one of the more shocking fails of the night. Again, Slam Dunk is an obstacle I don't really look at as that difficult. Before this, the only real, shocking fail in the obstacle here was Jody Avila, but not necessarily because of his actual skill level, more so because of his edit. Joe Moravsky's kind of on both ends, where I thought he was getting a strong edit, and he was also a really top contender. So to see him fail there was a pretty big surprise. And we do get some other shocking fails this episode as well, where David Wright and Thomas Stillings both failed the falling shelves. Jesse Graff also fails there and injures his shoulder in the process. John Alexis Jr. failed to Slam Dunk as well. But this was the fast forward that I was talking about. And again, I don't know what he did. What did he do to production to make him be completely ignored on the season? Obviously Drew is Drew. That's a completely separate situation. But John Alexis Jr. is just so strange. I was kind of assuming okay, does Drew have something to do with John Alexis Jr.'s run? Because he got both his runs completely skipped previously. But then on this episode, we get the fast forward treatment and we do see his run. And there's no Drew anywhere. So it's I don't get why he was skipped. He must have really pissed off production. I really wonder what happened there. But then we get some Dragon Back fails as well. RJ Roman ends up failing there and doesn't end up moving on, which I think that's a pretty disappointing end for his season. But we did get Amir Malik, who was able to squeeze in at number 8 to the finals. And I'll be honest, I was getting a bit worried that he was going to end up winning the season. And there's a couple things here. I think first off, the fact that he is this rookie that we were introduced to this season, and to see him just automatically just go straight to being the best around, I think that would be kind of just underwhelming because, again, with Sasuke and Ninja Warrior even, it's a lot of the progress that we see within the competitors is gradual. We usually don't see someone do ridiculously well right at the beginning. They usually have to start off at a point and then gradually get better over time. I mean, take someone like Drew. I mean, Drew is someone that, again, say what you will about him as a person now, obviously terrible person, but when we're looking at his arc on ANW, I really feel it's perfect. I mean, he starts off injuring his leg on ANW 3, having to get taken out. Then he has a series of stage 2 fails and some, I believe even a semifinal fail somewhere in there. But then eventually he becomes one of the top contenders when he starts getting to stage 3 and fails stage 3 pretty consistently. And then he finally ends up achieving total victory in ANW 11, again 8 seasons later after his first appearance. Again, Makoto Nagano from Sasuke, a big example of this, where it took him 11 tournaments to achieve Kanzen Seiha, despite getting really deep runs multiple times. It's for me, that's what makes American Ninja Warrior and Sasuke so interesting, is seeing the gradual progression of these competitors, and to see someone just automatically win on their first try is just kind of a letdown for me. And I think also adding in the fact that he was also the only person to not clear the finals course here. He kind of squeezes by through being the fastest time to the Dragon Back, and I think that also would just lead to a pretty underwhelming outcome if he had won. So I was getting a bit worried there. Now, obviously, we did get some clears as well, and I did like how they continued to show the leaderboard on this episode. That's something I really criticize ANW for throughout the years, is how it really neglects this idea of there obviously being this top group and people getting eliminated from it one by one as more runs occur. A lot of that has to do with the editing and the order of the runs, but here with this season, this was the perfect opportunity to actually show us people in the bubble, show them getting eliminated, and they kind of did that. I did like how we were shown the leaderboard. We didn't really see many reactions. Obviously, COVID probably played a factor into that as well, but I do think this was a step in the right direction, though I'm more than likely they'll just go back to their old ways after this. But we did get some clears. As I said, we got some clears. Adam Rail, pretty unremarkable clear there, but he did make it. Daniel Gill had the second fastest time of the night, and I really love how he just blew through the spider trap. I thought that was a lot of fun. And then we obviously have Jake Murray, who ends up getting the fastest time of the night. And that leads us to the Power Tower tournament that was going to end the season. And I will say that I didn't find this as boring as I thought I would. However, obviously there is a lot of questions that come up from this with the editing of the season that I just don't get some of the editing decisions that they made over the course of it. And I also do feel like this is still pretty anticlimactic. I do feel like this is still a really mediocre way to finish the season. But again, considering the circumstances that we were in, I guess it's fine. So we start off with an upset where Austin Gray ends up beating Najee Richardson, which again isn't that shocking from a realistic standpoint. Najee's never really been the fastest competitor, and Austin Gray's always been pretty consistent with speed. I just find it shocking from an editing standpoint, where again, we didn't see anything of Austin Gray. And it was really just an afterthought. So for me, it was really, really clear that he wasn't going to win the season. But for him to actually end up being the runner-up just shows how incompetent the editing on this season was. As again, there was just no suspense once we got to the final round. We did see Lucas Reale versus Adam Rayl, and this was one of the biggest blowouts of the night, where Adam Rayl just blows him away. Again, kind of an underwhelming conclusion to Lucas Reale's season. Jake Murray and Amir Malik ran next, and this was pretty shocking to me from a realistic standpoint, as Jake, again, had been so strong the entire season, got the fastest time in all 3 previous rounds. But again, I think this furthered the point of me being really worried that Amir was going to win. And then we get Daniel Gill versus Jesse Labreck, which, I mean, come on. Daniel Gill obviously blew this one away. I mean, if she had been up against a Najee, a Lucas, and some of these kind of slower power tower people, okay, maybe she would have a shot again against Daniel Gill. It's come on, she was never winning this. But overall, though, I really hated how this first round played out, where coming into it, there were 4 possible winners for me from an editing standpoint. I do feel like there was Najee, Jake, Amir, and Daniel. But this round ended up eliminating half of those. And again, I would have been disappointed if Amir had won this season. So really, the only satisfying conclusion for me at this point was a Daniel Gill win. And we did get that, so that was cool. But I do think that, again, just further perpetuates how weird the editing was on this season, that they couldn't build up people like Adam Rayl and Austin Gray as more realistic winners at this point. But after this, we did get a modified power tower that added a cliffhanger, so I mean, that was cool, I guess. But once Amir loses to Austin Gray here, I was pretty confident Daniel had it in the bag, but his race against Adam Rayl was really fun to watch, with them going back and forth and Adam just crashing into the buzzer at the end. Obviously, Daniel wins, and we get to the final round, which is Daniel versus Austin Gray, and I never thought Austin had a shot, due to the editing. Daniel, throughout this episode, had such strong winner content with multiple segments about how he wants to buy a house with the money and start a family. They kept on talking about how close he was to winning last season, so for me, the conclusion here was going to be pretty obvious. And Daniel does end up winning. It was kind of close, but for me, again, never really thought there was another outcome. So that's the season. Now, overall, again, I do find this season pretty weak, largely due to the fact that it's comprised of my least favorite sections of the A&W season. I wish they could have done the opposite, where instead of the qualifying format that we borrowed from, we got the traditional 4-stage course. But I understand why NBC wouldn't want to do that, because for them, obviously, they need to drag it out over multiple episodes, and to have so many people just running stage 1 and probably end up showing a good chunk of the runs there probably would get pretty boring. But I personally would have loved it. But really, just overall, I just couldn't take this season seriously as a season of American Ninja Warrior. It's going to make me laugh if in A&W 12 they talk about how, Daniel Gill, an American Ninja Warrior, the winner of last season. It's just going to be kind of ridiculous to me. It just doesn't feel like a real season. It just feels like kind of a spin-off, but I guess it is a real season, so what are you going to do? Again, for what it was fine. I probably did enjoy some of these episodes more than I do the standard A&W qualifying or city final episodes, especially because the field of competitors was a lot stronger here. I think you also have the fact that we're in the really wonky editing throughout, though. While part of that does come from them trying to cover up Drew Dreshold's involvement, which was something that was completely out of their control, obviously. They still made so many questionable decisions, which, to be honest, can be said about every season, but here, they literally knew the results. Unlike a standard season where the qualifying episodes end up airing before the filming of Vegas, here, they knew literally the entire results. So the fact that they didn't edit this properly to give us a more proper storyline throughout the season, I do find that to be a major misstep on their end. Again, by the time we got to the final 8, a good chunk of those competitors weren't really promoted throughout the season, and because of that, you knew that certain ones weren't going to win. So again, it's really tough for me to assess the season in comparison to the previous ones, but it wasn't a season completely devoid of entertainment. There were definitely some good moments here and there. There were definitely some shocking fails, some really great runs. I think the David Campbell run for me is one that really sticks out as a really memorable run. And we also had these really fast Jake Murray runs that were fun to watch. There were some really great runs on this season. I wouldn't be surprised if I do reassess my season rankings and this one does end up towards the bottom of the list. So that is my review for A&W 12. Obviously, I do plan on covering A&W 13 whenever we get it, so stay tuned for that. If Sasuke 38 does end up happening as well, as it's currently scheduled, I will obviously cover that as well. I would love to do a Sasuke tournament ranking sometime down the road as well, but who knows when I'll get to that. And same thing goes with the History of A&W series, which I would love to do a video on A&W 4, but considering how long those videos take to make, both in the research process and also the process of actually making the video. I really just don't see myself making it anytime soon, but it is something I would like to make sometime down the road. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.